I'm Chris Lee of Southeastern 14, joined today by a good friend, Neal McCready. He has covered Ole Miss for how many years now, Neal?
This is my 15th season covering Ole Miss. I would
Oh
never,
my.
in my wildest imagination, thought that I would be when I started this. My first day on the job was Houston Nutt's first spring practice. If you had told me that day that I would still be here in 2022, A, I would not have believed you. B, I probably would have assaulted you. And C, I would have returned back to not believing you and probably gone back and said, "All right, this was a bad idea," and begged the people in Mobile to give me my job back. No, I'm kind of kidding, not completely kidding. I didn't think it would be a long-term stay, but Oxford is a fantastic place to raise kids, and it's been great for our kids. The nest is almost empty now, but at the time when we moved here, our oldest was starting the second grade. We had one that was starting kindergarten, and our son was almost 2. And so he turned
Wow.
16 on Tuesday, and the girls are in college at the University of Arkansas. So yeah, life goes fast, man.
Yeah, time flies. It hits you when you start realizing, like, my oldest kid is now well past that halfway point mark of birth and being out of the house, and it's when it starts to register a bit. So
Yeah, you just getting started with registry, bud.
yeah,
You just
let's not go there today.
getting rolling. You're not there yet.
Well, you've got an interesting beat these days. Ole Miss has won a national title in baseball, and of course, football is king. Your work, by the way, can be found at Rebel Grove. You've got an exhaustive podcast network. We'll get into that later.
Yeah.
But this is a big game for Ole Miss. How excited is the city of Oxford and that Ole Miss fan base for Kentucky?
I would imagine they're geeked up. They certainly should be. I've been talking about this game. If you've listened to my show, or the people that my listeners probably have heard so much about this game that they're sick of hearing about it. But I've been talking about Kentucky since the schedule came out, in large part because I recognized what Stoops was building there, and I was recognizing what Kiffin was building here, and you could see it like a crash course. You could look at the schedules and you could go, "Hey, they're going to both be 4-0. They're going to both be nationally ranked." It's the sexiness of a Kiffin game at home in Oxford, and Kentucky with that gritty kind of defense, Iowa of the SEC brand that they have is so contrasting. And I looked at it and went, "This is going to be a monumentally big game." I'll throw a stat at you. I don't know if have you heard me talking about this yet?
A little bit. I don't know if I've heard the stat you're going to
Okay.
bring up, but
If you go back 18 games,
oh yeah,
you heard this? If you go back 18 games for every school in the league, obviously there's 2 that are on top. Alabama and Georgia, they're the class of the country, certainly the class of the SEC. The next 2 have the same record. You probably can guess at this point who they are. Ole Miss and Kentucky are 15-3 in their last 18 games. 15-3 at Ole Miss and Kentucky. 15-3. No one else is even close, really. Arkansas, kinda, but not really. A&M, a little bit the same. Tennessee's flirting with some stuff, but they're not there. 15-3.
Well, and from Ole Miss,
That's
a
it.
lot of those games are against SEC West teams, Neal. That's hard to do.
Ole Miss has in the last, dating back to the 2020 Outback Bowl, where they beat Indiana. Ole Miss has lost at Alabama, at Alabama, at Auburn, and in the Sugar Bowl to Baylor in the game where Matt Corral got hurt in the first quarter. That's not an excuse. It's just the game people can remember because no one remembers bowl games unless your team played in them. The last coach to come to Vaught-Hemingway Stadium as a visitor and win is Gus Malzahn.
Wow.
I mean, how about that? I mean, the Ole Miss has won 10, 11 games in a row at home. I don't remember the exact number. A lot of those are non-league games or whatnot, but they've won games. And like you said, in the SEC West, They've beaten Texas A&M, beaten LSU, they've beaten Mississippi State twice in that period. They've beaten Arkansas in that period. Obviously, they beat Georgia Tech. They've won a bunch of games. They've done a really good job, and he's built a really solid program. And Lane Kiffin figured out how to work the transfer portal better and faster than a lot of other people, and it's shown. They've done what this season should have been a rebuild year for Ole Miss based on just the way rosters were turning over, and he turned to the portal and went, I think, heavier on the portal than he intended to, but it worked. And I don't think this is going to be a rebuild year. Now, is this going to be a 10-2 season? I don't know. Well, ask me Saturday afternoon. I'll be able to give you a much better answer. But he has kept them relevant for really the whole time he's been at Ole Miss, which is a remarkable accomplishment.
And the losses, if I recall, Alabama, Baylor in the bowl game, and I think Auburn just before Auburn went in the toilet a year ago.
Yeah, they went to Auburn and lost. Corral had gotten hurt. He was limping around. Ole Miss really didn't have any receivers available that day. Not an excuse. They lost. It's hard to go. It's hard to go to Jordan-Hare and win. And Auburn had a great environment that night. And that was right before Auburn just sort of started taking the gas pipe a little bit. But yeah, those are the games. They lost at Alabama, at Auburn, and then in New Orleans to Baylor. Other than that, they've won. I mean, if you go back if you take it a little further and you get into that pandemic year, and I hate doing this because that year was so screwed up, right? I mean, like Kentucky went to Alabama that year and lost in 2020, but they had like 24 starters out, with contributors out because of COVID stuff. And but if you do go back, Ole Miss finished that season. They lost at LSU, but they beat Mississippi State. They beat South Carolina. They beat somebody else. So I mean, you could even go further, and it's like 18-4 or 17-4, 18-4, whatever. I think it's 17-4 in their last 21. It's just a remarkable accomplishment for anybody, but especially when you consider where the program was when Kiffin and those guys inherited it, and the fact that the first calendar year, basically, or more, they had all the recruiting restrictions because of COVID.
Kentucky has got a streak or a trend or something like that against SEC West teams on the road, I think. I don't know what it is, but I was hearing some talk about it this week. What is it exactly?
10 losses in a row to SEC West teams on the road. They've won a lot of home games, but they've lost on the road. A lot of those to Mississippi State. They have that's their cross opponent, and that has become a home and home series. Kentucky wins in Lexington, Mississippi State wins in Starkville, but they lost to Alabama. And then, I was talking to Justin Rowland. We actually did the question and answer thing that we exchanged. You and I'll probably do it next week because it's easy, free content. And he pointed out, when Stoops first got to Kentucky, they were so bad they didn't have enough players. So of course they lost to SEC West teams, but they've been closer. And this is one that I think Kentucky's had circled for a while too, because. Look, I mean, we'll talk about Ole Miss in a minute, but look at it from Kentucky's standpoint, which I think is fascinating. If Kentucky wins this game, just 1 point, 10 points, half a point, 100 points, whatever. If Kentucky wins this game, Chris, they will have already gone to Gainesville, they will have already gone to Oxford, and they will have gotten 2 SEC road wins. Now, they still got to go to Knoxville, and that's going to be a hell of a challenge. But they get Georgia at home. I had Mike Griffith on my show earlier today. Mike was critical of Georgia. He goes, "Look, they're good. They're really good, but they're not as good as they were a year ago. They're gettable." If that's true, and Kentucky wins on Saturday, when Kentucky gets back to Lexington and goes to bed and gets up on Sunday morning to go to work, they go to work Sunday as a national title contender, and people can make fun of that all you want to. It's fine. I don't care. I know it doesn't sound right, but they are at that point. And listen, I think the same kind of holds true for Ole Miss, because here's why. This is why this game's big. The winner of this game is just kind of in a shot to make some noise. Ole Miss gets at Vanderbilt next week. My guess is that Ole Miss would be about a 20-point favorite over Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
Then they get Auburn at home. Auburn's probably going to lose to LSU on Saturday. Then they're going to get spanked in Georgia. There's no telling whether Harston's even the coach at that point. Auburn comes to Ole Miss as probably a 11 and a half, 12-point dog.
Mm-hmm.
Ole Miss probably wins both of those games. If Ole Miss wins those games, assuming they beat Kentucky, which is a hell of an assumption, Ole Miss would be 7-0 going to Baton Rouge October the 22nd. They go to Baton Rouge, then they go to College Station, then they get a weekend off. So even if they split those two games, and again, we're getting pie in the sky a little, but 8-1 coming home with a week off before they play Alabama, they would have a shot, even as an 8-1 team, if they were to beat Alabama, to wake up in November as very much in the playoff hunt.
Yeah, well, and worst case scenario, it's another Sugar Bowl or whatever, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean, look, the close of their schedule is really hard. At LSU, at Texas A&M, Alabama, they got to go to Arkansas. They get Mississippi State at home. Mississippi State will be desperate to beat them, and I don't know what Mississippi State is or isn't at this point. We're going to find out a little bit more about them against Texas A&M on Saturday, but it's hard at the end. But the point is that they have time to continue to improve and to build momentum, and sometimes momentum will carry you through a game a little bit.
Yeah. The matchup with Kentucky is fascinating because it feels like I know this isn't exactly it, right? But it feels like a 1980s game where the focus is going to probably be on the running team for both teams. Although with Will Levis, I mean, Kentucky's actually been better passing the ball.
I love
running it
way to the point where a lot of my people think I've become a Kentucky fan. I love watching Levis play.
Yeah.
I think there's a ton of tools that he has. There's a ton of potential. Now, look, the mayonnaise thing in the coffee is bizarre, but but he's got a lot of charisma. Kids like him. I think he has a real chance to be a very productive NFL quarterback down the road. Now, that does not mean he's a finished product and a great player on Saturday. So if he goes, 12 for 27 on Saturday and throws a couple of picks and loses, people are going to go, "Oh, you're an idiot." It's like, not what I'm saying. I'm just telling you the tool set is there for him to be a very good NFL quarterback one day. I didn't mean to interrupt you. He's fun to me.
Well, he's got a rocket for an arm.
Yes.
And the other thing he's got, and this isn't because Kentucky has been running game and defense. The running game has sputtered so far. They get Rodriguez back. We can talk about that in a minute, Neil. But they got a couple freshmen, Key and Brown, that can just fly, that were two of the higher rated recruits they've had in a while. To me, that is going to be one of the interesting parts of this game. Is do they break a play or two deep? Everybody's focused on the running game, but they've got some weapons there.
They do. They're very talented at receiver, like you mentioned. Levis can get them the ball. They get Rodriguez back at running back, which is going to help their running game. But it gets to this. Like, if people say, "What are you watching for in this game?" Well, I'm watching Kentucky's offensive line because it's been a struggle. They've had a hard time protecting Levis. They've had a hard time establishing the run. That's putting it not nicely, quite frankly. They really haven't gotten the run going this year. How much of that is running backs? How much of that is offensive line play? My guess is that the bulk of it is offensive line play. And so having Rodriguez back, does that make the line better? I don't know. Maybe a little. What Kentucky wants to do, obviously, is they want to, like everybody does, they want third downs to be manageable. They want third down to be having Ole Miss on their heels a little bit, guessing, where you can't just tee off on the quarterback, because their offensive line has shown that if it's third and long, you can throw blitz packages and such at them and they can't handle it, and that discombobulates the pocket, and he's having to get rid of the ball or dump it off, and they're getting a 4-yard pass on 3rd and 11. Well, that doesn't get you anywhere. So, obviously Ole Miss wants to dictate that. And then what Kentucky wants to do is they want to move the chains. They want to move the football. They want to run. They want to eat clock. They're very deliberate. They use the play clock to their advantage. And that's the last thing Ole Miss wants. Ole Miss wants to go. Ole Miss wants tempo. Ole Miss wants to make this a fast game. If this were a basketball game, Kentucky is the team that they want to They want to work some clock, make 4 or 5 passes, set some cuts, set some screens, see if they can lull you to sleep. And Ole Miss wants to fast break. Ole Miss wants to be showtime. So that's really again contrasting styles. I mean, you know, this is not Ole Miss versus Arkansas where both teams want to go fast, and before you know it, you've got a track meet. This is not that. Kentucky wants this to be a shot put event. They want this to be the field part of track and field. Ole Miss wants this to be the 100-meter dash.
The biggest question I have in this one, Neil, is can Kentucky do that? I mean, you look at the offense, and it's almost like, is this a misprint? They're averaging 10.1 yards a throw and 2.4 a rush. I mean, very un-Kentucky-like.
Yeah.
And I know Rodriguez has been out, but, like, I don't know how much stock you put into Pro Football Focus blocking grades. Kentucky's have not been good, which in grade or no grade, that yards per attempt to me is kind of loud. They've not exactly played a killer schedule to date. I don't know what to make of it because I do think Rodriguez makes them better, but I start to worry about teams when you cannot do things well against a mediocre schedule. And I think so far, and look, they're a really good team even with it. That's been a little bit loud.
Yeah, I think they've played an okay schedule. I think Miami of Ohio is a pretty good team. I think Florida's a good team, and Florida was geeked up for Kentucky.
Yeah.
They were jacked up for Kentucky. That place was packed. They just beaten Utah. Richardson had played out of his mind against Utah, and Kentucky took him away. Kentucky made him do what he doesn't like to do, and he didn't do it well. They were able to dictate, hey, we're not going to let you, Richardson, beat us with your feet. We're going to make you throw the football. We're going to control you in the pocket. They have very good linebacker play. They have good guys off the edge, and they held him in the pocket, and he just couldn't. He threw inconsistently. He threw a pick six. That's what they do well. On the flip side, I think there is some stock you can put in Pro Football Focus grades here because the results equal the grades. They're not running the football effectively, as opposed to I don't really know what Ole Miss's offensive line run blocking grades are, but I can tell you that they've been creating holes for running backs to go through because they've had a lot of success running the football. So, I think we can pretty much guess what's coming in this game in terms of strategy, what the plan is. If you're Kentucky, the plan is, hey, we are going to take away the best we can your running game. We're going to populate the box in such a manner that your reads are going to require you to throw the football. And we're going to make your 19-year-old quarterback beat us in the air. And if he does, he does. If you're Kentucky, that's what you do. You have to take something away and make that other aspect beat them. And I'm sure Kentucky's thinking, it's not even about Jackson Dart. Your receivers, Ole Miss's receivers, haven't shown that they can get separation, that they can make the big play down the field consistently the way that, Lane's always had an Elijah Moore or he had a Braylon Sanders, guys who could, whether it was on the outside or the inside, take the top off of the defense. They haven't shown that yet. So I think that's what they're going to try to make them do. And if you're Ole Miss, you want them to try to run the football. You want to take the run away. You want to get into third and long, and you want to pressure Levis. You don't want Levis to get into a rhythm. You don't want him to get his feet set, get his shoulders square, because that arm is legit. And if he's got time and he's got the ability to get set and go through his progressions, he can beat you down the field. He can make that deep out that a lot of guys can't. He's not going to stare down a receiver as much as he used to. He's gotten much better about that. He's dangerous.
What do you make of Ole Miss's defense? Because heading into the Tulsa game, statistically, they were on par with anybody. The schedule had been very suspect. And the Tulsa game, Neil, was one that I think we looked at and we said, well, Tulsa just throws the heck out of the ball. They got good receivers. It was an intriguing matchup that should have been a little bit of a litmus test, but it wasn't because their quarterback went out, second quarter?
Yeah.
They gave up 27 points, which is probably disappointing under the circumstance. What do you make of it? after seeing them against Tulsa last week under that circumstance?
I thought going into that game that they had the potential to be an elite defense, and maybe they still do, but I thought the Tulsa game was alarming. And everyone talks about the second half. I remember the first half. Davis Brin led Tulsa on a couple of touchdown drives, throwing the football before he got hurt. They were moving the football effectively against Ole Miss. And then he went out, and the backup came in, and he struggled a little, and Ole Miss scored a bunch of points. That was shaping up like, ooh, what are we looking at here? Is this going to be 28-24 at the half? Because they couldn't stop him. So if I'm Ole Miss, I'm a little, and I think they were, and I think they are. That was a little alarming because, boy, Tulsa put some stuff on film that I have to believe Kentucky's offensive staff looked at and went, hey, there's some things we can do here. And so this is it's I'll say this, Chris. It was pretty obvious just through the week from talking to people that the Ole Miss defensive staff, this was a come to Jesus moments early in the week. Like, hey, we play like this against Kentucky, against LSU, against Arkansas, against Texas A&M, we're losing. This won't work. Nothing against Tulsa, because I think Montgomery's done a really good job there, but come on.
Yeah, it's a different ball game with what they're about to face. Ole Miss has had, I don't know if the word is uncertainty at the quarterback position. Didn't have a starter going into the season. Been a little bit up in the air. Seems like they found Jackson Dart. But what they've really found is a running game.
Yeah.
They've got three guys who can really run it.
And Dart can run it.
Make it four. But three at the running back position, one of whom may be out. What are you expecting on Saturday, factoring health into all that?
I think I'm betting that Zach Evans plays. I don't know how effective he'll be because if look, Kiffin does not disclose injuries. He doesn't talk about injuries. He's very coy about that, which is going to be interesting down the road, by the way, with college football as they incorporate more and more gambling talk. I think you're going to have to go a little more NFL style with injuries and stuff. You're going to have to disclose them. But he doesn't. The rumor is hip pointer, and if it's a hip pointer, that's pretty painful. Quinshon Judkins, the freshman's just fantastic. He had 27 carries last week, I think. He can handle it. He's a terrific young player. And then Ulysses Bentley, the fourth, who transferred from SMU. I think he's hurt. I'd be a little surprised based on what I've heard if he plays, but who knows? Because you're guessing a little. But look, they're going to run the ball, and they run it with Dart. He likes to run the ball, especially early in games. He likes to run as a way of getting himself into the games. I wonder whether Lane wants Dart to run as much as he's running. That backfired for Ole Miss last year. They were, they were an elite offense last year until Matt Corral got hurt. And then they were not elite. They were good, but they weren't elite. And, I wonder whether he wants to be careful with how much Dart runs. Dart's a super competitive kid. He's tough. He likes contact. Reminds me of a young Matt Corral. And just in terms of his competitiveness, and that's a good thing, but it can be a bad thing. You don't want the horse to get out of the barn and just start sprinting everywhere. You kind of want to control him a little bit. And so, yeah, Ole Miss wants to run it. They haven't shown that they can pass it effectively, consistently. But I think if they're going to be the team that they want to be, the team that they envision themselves, they got to start being more balanced.
This feels to me like a low-scoring game. I was surprised a little bit when the line came out. I think Ole Miss was a 7-point favorite, maybe 6.5. I can't remember what the over-under was, but it seemed a little much to me. Were you a little surprised at both numbers? I mean, Kentucky, a 7-point underdog anywhere, outside maybe Georgia and Alabama, given the perception of that program, was a little surprising to me.
The computers really like Ole Miss. Like some of the computer things have Ole Miss like 6th, 7th in the country right now. So yeah, 7 surprised me. It feels like a little bit of a Vegas trap where Vegas goes, "Ooh, we're going to throw a big number at people and get them to go under the number and take Kentucky in the points." And it's almost like Vegas expects a double-digit Ole Miss win, but I don't. I think I'm picking Ole Miss to win the game, but I think it's a lot closer than that. I think it's 3 points, 4 points. I think it's a lot closer than that. And then I think some of it is Kentucky has looked very average in some of their games, but they didn't look average at Florida. They went to Florida. Again, you have to give them credit for this. They went to Florida, trailed in the second half, and won the football game. And Kentucky has Florida ghost hanging over them, but they've now beaten them twice in a row. I mean, Stoops is changing the culture of that program, and the next big step for them is to go on the road and beat an SEC West team. And so he's got this thing circled. He just does, and Kiffin does too. It's really a fun game on a day full of kind of interesting games. This is way up there.
Yeah, to your point about the computers, we run a composite every week. There's 8 computers in it, Neal. 7 of the 8 have got Ole Miss ranked ahead of Kentucky. The one that is not is Pro Football Focus, which is maybe my least favorite of all of them. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, Ole Miss was not ranked below 13 in any of those. FPI had Kentucky as low as 30. Again, I think that we're at a point where I don't know how much stock we put in these or we should put in these because of the discrepancy of the schedules, but it is what it is.
It's a little early to completely judge them. Like 3 weeks from now, when people have played 4 conference games, I think you look at it and go, "Hey, this is a pretty good litmus test. This is a good benchmark of what we can expect." I don't know that we're there yet. Like, I don't think this is the case. In fact, I would bet a lot of money against this. But it's possible Ole Miss is just very average.
Yeah.
I mean, they've played bad teams. They played a Troy in week 1. I know John's done a great job at Troy, and they've gotten better and better and better, but they weren't good that day. They played Central Arkansas, who lost to my son's pickup soccer team the next day. It was awful. No, I'm kidding. They played Central. It was a joke. It was a complete disaster of a game. It had no redeeming value at all. They destroyed Georgia Tech, and they looked great doing it. They could have beaten Georgia Tech 70-0. But then they played Tulsa, and I don't know what do you make of that. I mean, I just don't. I think Ole Miss. I picked Ole Miss to go 8-4 before the year. It's what I would still probably pick. They could be better than that, but they could be worse than that. We don't know. And so whatever numbers the computers have to punch up, I don't know how much what those numbers really mean because there's no context behind them.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I mean, they're what we have.
For example, if Kentucky had played Central Arkansas instead of Florida and beaten them 56-0, what are we saying about Kentucky? Are we still saying, what are we, you know what I mean? I mean, the only thing we have from Kentucky that has any value is they do have a couple, the Miami game and then the game at Florida. Those are games. Now, how good is Florida? Hell, I don't know. Maybe very average when it's all said and done. It's not going to be Billy's best team in Gainesville, certainly. And I think it's too early. We don't know. And there's a handful of teams in the league that I think you can have a pretty educated opinion on right now, and I don't know that Ole Miss is one of them.
Yeah, they're mostly at the top, the very top, and the very bottom. I would say. I think from 3 to 10, Neal, it seems like a lot of parity to me. Just anybody could beat anybody any given week.
I think so. I think there are obviously some teams that have talent. Ole Miss, Kentucky, Tennessee. I'm really impressed with Tennessee so far. I've been impressed with Arkansas, but they had 3 or 4 plays in Arlington that cost them what could have been a pretty easy win, I think. Conversely, even though A&M won the game, I'm not impressed with them. I've watched them play 3 times now, and I don't think they're very good. A guy that I do a show with twice a week, Tyler Siskey, thinks that A&M is really good. I disagree. We'll see. I think LSU's getting better. I think they're going to improve as the season goes along. I think Florida's going to be a solid team by the time it's over with. But this is year one for him and what's going to be a rebuild. Hell, Chris, I just don't know. I mean, what do we know about Mississippi State? If Mississippi State beats A&M on Saturday in Starkville, are we having a different conversation about them? I mean, I know what I saw in the second half at LSU where they just spit the bit, but
yeah,
that was one game. We've seen that happen in the league. The only teams that I've seen in the league that I watch and go, I don't know that there's a path for these guys to be good is Vanderbilt, Missouri, Auburn. I don't see it. And then probably South Carolina. It's not there yet. Rattler's not particularly an answer for them, but the other teams, you can toss them in a hat. I mean, like look at the Arkansas Texas A&M game last week. I think if those two teams played again this week, I'd pick Arkansas again. I picked them last week.
Yeah.
I had it 24-23 Arkansas, and if he makes the kick, it's 24-23, and I look like a genius. So I was that close, Chris.
You and I have watched a lot of football. Well, literally, have you ever seen a field goal missed where that one missed?
No.
I mean, we've seen how many thousands of football games between the two. I've never seen anybody hit a kick off the apex of the upright.
Can you imagine the controversy that would still be going today if that ball goes one?
Oh, yeah.
If that ball goes 1 foot higher, that's a judgment call that's not reviewable. Oh. Did you know that?
Well, I mean, I guess I did because I've never seen a field goal reviewed, which I think is kind of.
How would you review it?
Well, I guess you could put cameras on the crossbar, but at each upright. But
if the ball goes above the camera,
yeah,
how do you know? Because the camera would be on the crossbar. So how would you even if that ball goes 1 foot higher? Arkansas would believe today that they made the kick, and A&M would believe today that they didn't.
We could put lasers in the uprights, couldn't we? In the pipes going out the top.
I guess you could, but they don't.
They should.
They might be thinking about it now. But anyway, the play that sticks out to me in that game was 2nd and 15 when they were driving. The bad snap. Because without the bad snap, I think they score a touchdown. Because A&M was approaching the point where you had to think about letting them score a touchdown so that you could get the ball back.
Yeah.
So that was just a crazy. That was your typical SEC game. That was the upscale version of the Auburn Missouri game from earlier in the day, where it was just I still can't believe. I feel so bad for the kid that he fumbled there inside the one because he didn't. There was no reason to reach the ball. It was. I think if he had tucked it, he was still going to score. But even if he tucked it and gotten tackled at the one, it's 1st and goal.
How much of that game did you get to watch?
All of it. It was like watching.
I say get to like, as if that were a privilege, but
I couldn't turn away.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it was great. It's what happens in the SEC. Just games just get weird because stuff happens and then, like you said, I mean, there's these two teams at the top that are better than everybody. And yet, like, look, if you told me Alabama's road schedule is brutal, they got to go to Fayetteville Saturday. They got to go to Knoxville in 2 weeks. They got to go to Oxford 3 weeks after that. And they have to go finish in Baton Rouge. If you told me Alabama got in trouble in one of those games, are you surprised?
Well, more often than not, they lose one of those. Like, how many of Saban's teams have gone unbeaten?
I mean, a few, but yeah, it's
couple, but yeah.
Really hard to go undefeated in this league.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard to do it. And I mean, those are 4 spots on their schedule where it could get kind of weird. I mean,
yeah.
I don't think it gets weird Saturday. I think they blow Arkansas out. But, if Arkansas gets off to a good start and then maybe something happens, you get a place that gets rowdy and loud. And, hey, I've watched Alabama get beat. I'll never forget. I mean, one of the games that I can remember vividly stuff about it was watching Alabama come here in 2014 when Ole Miss with Bo Wallace and those guys, they just kind of had that game circled. They had a little momentum. And even in that game, they were down at the half, I think 14-3 at the half. And you thought, they're in trouble. But they came out, got a score. Alabama had a turnover. Next thing you know, oh wow, this is a 5-minute game, and the
Yeah.
crowd was just nuts, and that happens. It happens all the time. That same year, a few weeks later, I covered an Ole Miss game at LSU. Ole Miss was clearly better than LSU, but they couldn't finish them, and that place got louder and louder and louder and louder. And by the end, man, I mean LSU was just playing with so much adrenaline and so much. That's college football. And so if you told me that, I mean, what do you think Neyland's going to be like when Alabama comes to town in a few weeks? It's going to be
crazy.
It's going to be nuts. And so, I mean, if Ole Miss is say 8-1 when Alabama comes to town, what's Oxford like? It's a zoo.
Yeah.
And and who knows what LSU is going to be by the end of the year? I don't think this is going to be a very good team, but maybe they figure some things out, and that place can be nutty. So who knows?